Dodging a bullet was impossible, well, for a mundane human, at least. However, dodging a gunshot was not that hard. After all, the shooter had to raise their arm, take aim, and squeeze the trigger. The hammer had to strike, and the gunpowder had to explode, propelling the bullet forward. All of that took time. At long distance, there was still little one could do to avoid being shot despite having ample time to react. Things were different in close quarters, though, especially if a fighter was well trained. And there was hardly a more trained fighter than Sunny in all of Mirage City. Even lacking the ability to sense shadows and use shadow dance, he still possessed a profound knowledge of countless battle styles and a keen understanding of the fundamental laws of combat, not to mention a morbidly rich battle experience. So, now that Sunny was among the mercenaries, they were already doomed. He shot the first one in the face, then moved to escape the line of fire of the second one. A deafening gunshot rang out, but the bullet whistled past him. A moment later, Sunny kicked a henchman in the chest, sending him plummeting off the battlement. Taking a swift step forward, he used the mercenary whose bullet he had dodged to shield himself from the guns of two more. They lingered for a split second, hesitant to shoot their own comrade, and he used that split second to plunge his knife into his neck. By then, someone else was already aiming at him. Pushing the body of the mercenary at his two friends to slow them down a little, Sunny leaned back to avoid another bullet, then leaped forward. His knife hissed, slicing the shooter's wrist and forcing the henchman to drop his gun. At the same time, Sunny's revolver barked twice, and the backs of the heads of the two mercenaries who were staggering because of the thrown body exploded into a bloody haze. "Let's dance." Sunny grinned wickedly. Wielding a gun and a knife, he tore through the remaining mercenaries like a somber reaper. The battlements were relatively narrow, and their numbers were of little use when the enemy was that close. On the contrary, they were a hindrance, since those closer to him prevented those further behind from firing. The mercenaries were better equipped and far better trained than the members of the Black Snake gang, but they were just as powerless to stop his swift and cold-blooded advance. Blood spilled on the cold stones, mixing with rainwater. Effie joined him halfway into the slaughter, while Morgan covered them both with several well-placed shots from the safety of the guard tower. By the time Sunny discharged his sixth and last round, there was a pile of bleeding bodies on the battlements, as well as under the wall in the courtyard below. The remaining henchmen fled, retreating into the main keep. Making sure that nobody was moving, Sunny exhaled slowly and leaned on the parapet to try to catch his breath. This one skirmish seemed to drain him considerably. "I have mundane stamina now, what a pitiful existence." All he had done in the past few days was avoid sleep altogether, throw an assassin out of a window, fight Mordred, kill a few thugs targeting Saint, survive a car crash, fight some more thugs, do a bit of investigating, storm an ancient castle under a deluge of bullets, get shot, and dispatch a dozen mercenaries in hand-to-hand combat. And just because of these few measly things, he was already tired. How embarrassing. Sunny was suddenly glad that he had only started dating Nephice after becoming a saint. Morgan and the other Mordred caught up with them while he was trying to recover. The latter glanced around the scene of mayhem with wide eyes and then turned to him with a bright smile. "Goodness! Detective, you." Just then, something boomed thunderously down in the courtyard, and the entire castle shook. A pillar of fire rose above the walls for a moment and then collapsed, suffocated by the rain. Ignoring the dull pain in his chest, Sunny took a few steps to the edge of the battlements and peered down. Mordred seemed to have dealt with Maddox's henchman on the other side of the wall and was nowhere to be seen. All that remained in his wake was a trail of bodies. The mercenaries in the courtyard itself had retreated into the main keep, but not before detonating some kind of explosives, it seemed. Or perhaps it was just one of the construction machines that had exploded when a stray bullet hit its fuel tank. Out there below them, Saint slowly rose from the fire, just as aloof as always. Black smoke and white mist spun around her like a fierce whirlwind, making her onyx-black hair flutter wildly in the wind. Her eyes seemed to glow red as they reflected the dancing flames. "She's all right." Sunny let out a relieved sigh. Saint turned and glanced up, staring directly at him as she absorbed the white mist. Raising a hand, Sunny pointed to the magnificent keep of the castle and shouted, "Keep! Let's rendezvous in the main keep." She glanced at him for a few seconds, then nodded silently and headed toward the heart of the ancient castle with steady steps. Sunny turned to his companions and pointed to where an aerial bridge connected the battlements to the towering keep. "We should hurry, too." Sheathing his knife, he searched his pocket and pulled out a bullet, his last bullet, it seemed. Sunny sighed. "I'm out." He glanced at Effie, who shrugged. "Me too." "Oh, and I dropped my gun when I was hauling that door. It's somewhere in the courtyard." Morgan simply shrugged. "I'm on my last drum." "Couldn't you have shaken off those gangsters for more ammunition?" Sunny coughed, then winced when that caused a flash of pain to radiate from his bruised ribs. "Hey, it's not an armory, okay? I took everything they had." Loading the last round into his revolver, he gripped it and looked ahead, at the great keep of Mirage Castle. Maddock was somewhere in there, and something was telling him that the Castellan was there, as well. Sunny holstered the revolver and unsheathed his knife. "Let's go. We have a criminal mastermind to catch." Despite the losses Maddox's private security forces had suffered, there was still a small army of mercenaries left in the castle. It did not matter much that the outer wall had been breached, the main keep itself was designed with defense in mind, so carving a path to Maddox was not going to be easy. Especially with how low Sunny and his companions were running on bullets. See? One more reason why a sword is a superior weapon, the only thing you can run out of when using a sword is enemies to kill. If one was awakened, naturally. Sadly, Sunny wasn't awakened at the moment. Even if someone presented him with a sword right now, he would not be too happy. After all, even he was not mad enough to bring a sword to a gunfight. So, he was a little troubled. They made a move to rush toward the main keep, but at that moment, a polite cough interrupted them. The other Mordred seemed to linger behind, failing to follow them. Sunny glanced at him with a frown. "What are you doing? There's no time to waste." Mordred looked between him, Effie, and Morgan with an awkward expression, then opened his mouth hesitantly. "I am terribly sorry, and I don't mean to presume. But I could not help but wonder." He pointed down. "Why don't you just take their guns?" Sunny blinked a few times. "What is he?" Then, he blinked a few more times and looked down with an unreadable expression. The battlements were covered in bloody puddles and dead mercenaries. Each of those mercenaries had wielded a gun. Those guns were now littering the scene of carnage, soaking in the rain. Why had they not thought of picking them up, indeed? Sunny suppressed the desire to palm his face. "It's the lack of sleep." Morgan answered for him. "It's because we're awakened." Sunny looked at her with surprise. Noticing his expression, she shrugged. Everyone has subconscious biases. For awakened, weapons are synonymous with memories, and memories disappear when their master dies. So, no one would think to pick up a slain enemy's weapon. This behavioral pattern is so ingrained in us that we don't usually entertain such thoughts. The situation might have changed, but our biases remain the same. Sunny studied her with a dubious expression for a few seconds. "You're just saying a lot of big words to hide the fact that you are embarrassed too, aren't you?" Not expecting a response, he turned to the other Mordred. "To answer your question, it's because this one is in the habit of using wooden doors as weapons, this one is still coming off an entire cocktail of powerful tranquilizers, and I hate guns." He looked down. "Ah, but even though I detest them, I guess I'll make an exception just this once." With that, he leaned down and picked up a pistol, then stared at it in confusion. "Huh." Sunny looked at Effie and Morgan sheepishly. This one doesn't have a drum? Or a hammer? How do I load it, and how does it fire?" Morgan closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned down to pick up a gun of her own. She also searched the nearest few bodies and retrieved a few thin rectangular pieces of metal from them. "These are semi-automatic pistols, not revolvers, the mechanism is a bit different, but the end result is the same. And these are magazines." You load them into the handle, like this. Sunny stared. How do you know all this? Morgan looked at him with a peculiar expression. Because traditional firearms are still widely used in the modern day? These are still standard issue for most mundane soldiers and law enforcement officers. Even elite units equipped with magnetic mass drivers like the Gauss rifle still keep a semi-automatic pistol as sidearms, due to how reliable they are. The design is almost entirely the same, too. Gunpowder still rules mundane battlefields. Sunny glanced at the pistol in his hand silently. Fingerprint glance detected but not swapped. Wait. So these primitive, archaic weapons weren't archaic at all? They were still being used in the real world? Suddenly, he felt like a complete fool. No, how was I supposed to know? It wasn't like I was assigned to a regular unit in the evacuation army. And the thugs in the outskirts never used this type of gun either. Let's get some magazines, then. They were already lagging behind Mordred and Saint. So, they needed to hurry. They rushed across the outer wall and entered the aerial bridge connecting it to the main keep. The bridge had been raised by the workers renovating the castle and was quite treacherous, especially in the pouring rain. Nevertheless, they reached the door leading into the keep safely. Any pretense of safety went out of the window the second they entered it, however. Knowing that a squall of bullets would meet them inside, Sunny broke into a run and dove into the open door at full speed. He opened fire while still flying through the air. Time seemed to slow down as he saw half a dozen henchmen hiding overturned tables, aimed his gun as best he could, and pulled the trigger. Bullets tore through the air, missing him by mere centimeters. At the same time, display cases behind the mercenaries exploded into glass shards as his own bullets hit the wall. Sunny landed in a roll and dashed toward a pile of construction materials, sliding behind it while shooting several more times. This time, his aim was much better. One of the mercenaries let out a pained scream and fell to the floor, clutching his shoulder. More importantly, Sunny's explosive entrance gave Effie and Morgan an opportunity to open fire at the distracted enemies from the doorframe. The ambush at the entrance hall was annihilated in a matter of moments. Fingerprint moments detected but not swapped. But there were numerous halls in the great castle, and numerous narrow corridors. Fingerprint numerous detected but not swapped. Fingerprint numerous detected but not swapped. If they had to fight their way though someone was going to be hit by a stray bullet sooner or later. There was a muffled roar from somewhere down below, and the entire fortress shook. Saint was still pursuing the retreating mercenaries, it seemed. Sliding a new magazine into her scavenged pistol, Effie gave Sunny a questioning look. Where to now? He looked at the next door darkly. To the throne room. The path to the throne room was guarded by a swarm of mercenaries, who had hastily prepared for the assault. The corridors and halls of the great castle were full of construction materials and furnishings stored there in preparation for the grand exhibition. All of it was used to build makeshift barricades and gun nests. The halls had become miniature arenas. This is a bit exhilarating. Hiding behind a large crate while bullets whistled past him, Sunny felt a dark sense of thrill. Their assault was a singularly deadly affair, since one stray bullet could be the end of him. Death soared on invisible wings, too quick to be seen, and too numerous to be evaded. Every second could be their last, and all they could do was try their best and hope that luck would be on their side. Mundane humans were just that vulnerable and powerless in the face of firearms. But that was nothing new. Sunny had spent all of his adult life as an awakened, and while awakened were countless times stronger and more resilient than mundane people, they lived every day of their violent lives with this exact feeling. In the world of the nightmare spell, it rarely mattered how powerful you were, there were always beings who could erase you from existence with the mere fact of their presence, so in that sense, being vulnerable and helpless in the face of conventional guns was simply more of the same. At least he had a bulletproof vest, this time. Move. There was a lull in the barrage of bullets peppering his cover, which meant that the mercenaries targeting him were reloading. Using this chance, Sunny dove out of his cover and sprinted forward. He shot his pistol a few times as he ran, forcing his enemies to duck down, and then jumped over their makeshift barricade. A dozen seconds later, they were dead. Effie had cleared the second barricade by then, and Morgan calmly shot a lone henchman who had hidden himself on a tall scaffold and tried to pick them off from under the ceiling. As his body fell down, the other Morderate tentatively raised his head and emerged from behind a tall vertical crate. Looking around, he let out a wistful sigh. What a travesty, the statues. The crates the mercenaries had shot at contained priceless statues that were supposed to become the centerpiece of the exhibition in this hall. Now, the statues were destroyed. Even if they had not been shattered completely, they were at least damaged too severely to be displayed. Sunny gave the other Mordred a quiet look. He wanted to say that there was no point in worrying about the statues, but remained silent. Of course, there wasn't. The grand opening of the Mirage Museum the Valor Group had been preparing would never happen. Worrying about the destruction of the statues was meaningless, as well. Soon enough, the entire Mirage City would follow. This illusory reality was coming undone, one way or another. But even though Sunny knew that the other Morderate was acting foolish by regretting the damage done to the statues, he did not express his feelings aloud. The man knew how misguided his regret was better than anyone. His entire world was ending, and his entire life was being erased. Sunny was in a unique position to appreciate how terrible such a fate was. The fact that the other Morderate still seemed composed and even somewhat calm despite that, instead of breaking down or flying into uncontrollable rage, was another proof of how broken and incomplete he was. Despite how different the two sides of the Prince of Nothing were, neither of them could be called whole. Hurry up! They rushed out of the statue hall and faced another firefight in the corridor beyond. The darkness was torn apart by the muzzle flashes, and the deafening sound of gunshots reflected from the stone walls, growing almost unbearable. After the corridor, there was another hall, and after the hall, there was a deadly clash in a narrow stairwell. Sunny and his companions used the scavenged guns to push the enemy back. Other times, they had to resort to hand-to-hand combat and deal with the mercenaries in a more visceral manner. But no matter what kind of obstacle they met around the corner, nothing could stop them. They tore through the defense of Maddox's private security forces without ever losing momentum, leaving a trail of slaughter and dead bodies in their wake. It was no surprise. Out here in Mirage Castle, met with the ferocious resistance of elite forces hired by Maddox, Sunny could fully appreciate just how fearsome his contemporaries were. Mirage City was a reflection of a place that had existed in an era of peace. Sunny's own time, however, was an era of strife and war. Everyone received combat training from early childhood, regardless of gender or social status. There was no distinct martial culture in the real world. Martial culture was simply culture. The government was ostensibly the command center of a vast planet-wide army, and every human living on that planet was a conscript. It was just that, similar to an actual army, not every conscript was assigned a combat role. Some maintained the infrastructure, some produced tools of war, some generated supplies that the soldiers needed to function, but even these non-combatants were trained fighters. And that was merely the mundane population. There were also the elites of this militant society, the awakened, who had been forged into a perfect warrior cast by the nightmare spell. Only those who survived the horrors of the first nightmare and the harrowing expanse of the dream realm remained, and that cruel selection left little space for a lack of martial talent or inherent weakness. Among these hardened survivors, only the best of the best rose to the top and became masters. And among the masters, only the strongest became saints. But Sunny, Effie, and Morgan were not merely saints. They were not merely some of the strongest humans out there, they were the absolute best among the absolute elites, the most lethal and vicious children of the cold new era. Sunny in particular had risen higher than almost anyone before. So what chance did these mercenaries have against them? Carving a bloody path to the heart of the castle, the four of them reached the throne room at the same time as Saint and Mordred. "How is it?" Sunny quietly retreated and glanced at his companions with a grim expression. He did not have anything reassuring to say. Basically, it's a death trap. The throne room of Mirage Castle was almost as grand and enormous as that of Bastion. The domed ceiling was tremendously high, and there were arched galleries running the length of the great hall halfway to the floor. Since Sunny, Effie, Morgan, and the other Mordred had entered the main keep from the aerial bridge, they arrived at a hidden entrance to one of the galleries as opposed to the towering gates leading to the main floor of the throne room. Sunny had entered the gallery stealthily and eliminated the mercenaries perched there without making any noise. That allowed him to take a peek at what was happening below. It seemed like Maddox's forces were preparing to make a last stand under the throne of Mirage. There were staggered rows of barricades and countless armed henchmen hiding behind them, ready to open fire at the gate the moment someone tried to open it. Worse still, there was too much space between the gate and the barricades. The throne room was just that vast. It was a killing field. Sunny scowled, unsure what to do. Even if they flanked the enemies by opening fire from the gallery, the sheer number of mercenaries would make it hard for anyone to survive the squall of bullets. Worse than that, some of them seemed to be armed with automatic rifles and submachine guns instead of the semi-automatic pistols the previous ones had wielded. At this point, Sunny would not be surprised to learn that the enemy even had a crate of grenades or two stashed somewhere in the throne room. Or a rocket launcher. Rocket launchers were a thing, right? He vaguely remembered something like that from the Devil Detective's memories. Sunny was a bit stunned. How come these private security goons are armed so much better than the police? Then again, legacies were always better equipped than the government awakened, too. More importantly, how was he going to deal with this thoroughly entrenched, heavily armed force? There were sporadic sounds of gunfire, screams, and muffled booms reaching the throne room through the closed gate, coming closer and closer. The castle quaked from time to time, and dust poured from the ceiling. Saint was drawing near. Sunny, Effie, and Morgan were going to have to act when she arrived, no matter whether they had a plan or not. He studied his companions for a moment, and then said in a grim tone, "Listen. Here is the..." But then, Sunny fell silent. That was because something had changed. The sounds of gunfire, screams, and muffled booms stopped abruptly, and the throne room was suddenly enveloped in eerie silence. The mercenaries below shifted nervously, aiming their guns at the gate. Sunny cursed and moved toward the parapet of the gallery, feeling that something was going to happen once the silence was broken. And it did. What? The towering gates did not open, and neither were they broken down. Instead, they simply disintegrated, consumed by a great flood of darkness. As the crushing black torrent rushed into the throne room, Sunny thought that the castle was drowned by the lake. Somehow, however, a moment later, he realized that the flood had nothing to do with water. It was a vast river of true darkness. The swirling mass of darkness moved as if it possessed a mind of its own, splitting into countless streams as it crushed into the floor of the throne room. Flooding the killing field like a surging wave, it washed over the barricades and swallowed them. A moment later, horrified screams and sounds of gunfire filled the grand hall. The muzzle flashes bloomed in the embrace of true darkness, only to be suffocated the next moment. A graceful figure moved under the cover of the dark flood, wading through the gunfire to silence the voices of the terrified mercenaries one after another. Sunny shook off his trance and raised his gun. "What are you waiting for? Shoot them." He opened fire first, aiming at the henchmen that were the furthest away from the raging flood of true darkness. A heartbeat later, Effie and Morgan joined him, using their elevated position to pick off the mercenaries with deadly precision. Mordred stood just a step away, watching the terrifying spectacle of Saint conquering the throne room of Mirage Castle with wide eyes. "Detective, that." He stammered for a moment, and then finished his sentence in a hesitant tone. "Is the wrong genre, I think?" Sunny barely heard his question through the cannonade. "What the hell are you talking about? Snap out of it and take cover, damn it." The other Mordred flinched and belatedly ducked down. "Apologies." Ejecting a spent magazine, Sunny reached for a new one and discovered that he had run out of ammunition. Cursing quietly, he threw the gun away and unholstered his revolver, which still had a single bullet left. He did not get the opportunity to use it, though. Because by then, the slaughter was over. The throne room grew quiet once again. The scream stopped, and the sounds of gunfire stopped, as well. The river of darkness swirled and retreated, being absorbed into Saint's body. Standing among the corpses, she glanced up and cast her indifferent gaze at the throne of mirage. Her face was covered in soot and blood, seeming too gorgeous to belong to a human. In fact, at that moment, her inhuman gorgeousness was eerie and haunting. Just then, the silence was suddenly broken by the sound of applause. Looking over to the gallery on the opposite side of the throne room, Sunny saw Mordred. The Prince of Nothing was leaning against an arch, clapping his hands as he looked down with an amused expression. "Wonderfully done, Dr. Saint. Truly remarkable. I'm in awe." Then, he looked in Sunny's direction and smiled. "Oh, by the way. Has anyone seen my uncle?" Soon enough, Sunny and his companions descended to the floor of the throne room. Mordred walked down the stone steps leading to the gallery, as well, wiping blood off his hands. They met under the throne of mirage, where Saint was still standing still, absorbing tendrils of white mist that stretched toward her from the corpses littering the floor. Mordred's stylish Viridian suit did not look much better than the tattered raincoat the other Mordred was wearing by then, that only made them look more alike. Sunny did not have the time to ponder how they managed to look unmistakably distinct despite being exactly the same, though. He frowned, noticing that there was something wrong with Saint. As more and more nothingness entered her body, her impassive expression seemed to be turning a little strained. It was as if she was struggling with something. At some point, she even grimaced and gritted her teeth, a subtle crease appearing on her brow. She did not seem to be wounded or in pain, so. "I think I know what is happening." Sunny did not exactly have proof to support his suspicion, but he felt that Saint was nearing an evolution, or perhaps even suppressing it on purpose. Before, she used to gain shadow fragments by consuming memories. Later, after he lost connection to the spell, that avenue of growth vanished. She had only received fragments once since that day, after killing one of Mordred's reflections. At least Sunny thought that she did. Slaying the others in Mirage City must have finally allowed her to reach the limit, and now, she was on the verge of ascending to either a new rank or a new class. It was just that Saint was resisting the evolution, unwilling to leave Sunny in times of need. Whether she was doing it consciously or unconsciously, he did not know. This was the good news. The bad news, meanwhile. "He's not here." Morgan's voice sounded concerned. There was indeed no trace of Maddox in the throne room. He had not perished in the throne room, either. The corpses of the mercenaries did not dissolve into white mist completely yet, and his body was not among them. Sunny frowned. "We must have dealt with most, if not all, of his minions. So where is he? Has he fled deep into the castle? What was the point of forcing the mercenaries to take a last stand here if Maddox himself had not been protected by them?" Mirage Castle was vast, so searching it from top to bottom was going to take a lot of time they did not necessarily have, both because of Castellan's probable reaction to Saint breaking the rules of Mirage City and because Maddox could slip away and escape while they were searching. Where would he go? Any ideas? Effie shrugged. Morgan frowned and shook her head. Mordred scratched the tip of his nose. "I must admit that I am not entirely sure." At that moment, the other Mordred said in a tentative tone. "Actually, I might have an idea." They all glanced at him, causing him to cough a couple of times. After staying silent for a bit, he pointed to the wall of the throne room opposite the gate. "Was personally involved in the Mirage Museum project, so I am somewhat familiar with the layout here. That small door over there leads to a spiral staircase, and that staircase leads all the way to the roof of the castle's highest tower. We wanted to create an observation platform there, for the visitors of the museum to enjoy the view of the city across the lake." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "So? Why would Maddox flee to the roof of that tower? It's not like he can escape from there, and I am pretty sure that he is not going to jump." The other Mordred sighed. "Sadly, the observation platform had to be scrapped, in the end, because the tower is really very high, and we couldn't figure out a way to fit an elevator anywhere while preserving the historical interiors of the castle at the same time. So, we built a helipad on the roof, instead. Sunny blinked a few times. I see. I can't help but ask, though. He raised an eyebrow. What the hell is a helipad? The other Mordred seemed a little confused by the question. Well, it's a landing area for a helicopter. Sunny gave him a deadpan look. What the hell is a helicopter? The other Mordred seemed both confused and a little embarrassed now. Oh. A helicopter is a kind of flying vehicle. People use it sometimes to reach distant areas, or simply to save time. It's handy to have one or two on standby. He glanced up and contemplated something for a few seconds. The weather is not at all fit for flying, but it would not be impossible either. Sunny frowned. A flying vehicle? There were not a lot of those in the real world, for various reasons, not the least of which was the fact that winged nightmare creatures were a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to entrust their life to a fragile alloy construct. Even land and water vehicles were difficult to protect in the world of the nightmare spell, and those could be weighed down by an almost limitless amount of armor. Plus, the passengers would not plummet to their deaths if such vehicles sustained a little damage. There was also the fact that terrible things happened to people who got too close to space. Sunny had learned that fact from Jet a long time ago, and back then, neither of them had known the reason. Now, he knew that it was because of the nightmare gate hidden on the dark side of the moon, and the creature guarding it. In any case, the idea of a flying vehicle was somewhat alien to Sunny. He was accustomed to seeing saints, dragons, and all kinds of horrors fly, but not machines. He was currently in a world different from his own, though. Wait, so you are saying that Maddox can just fly away if he reaches that helipad? The other Mordred offered him a smile. It is just a guess. Personally, I would avoid climbing into a helicopter during a rainstorm. Sunny did not respond, because he was already running toward the small door the other Mordred had pointed out. Hurry, damn it. Climbing to the top of the great tower of Mirage Castle was a torturous affair, but they did make it in time. Diving into the rain, with the dark sky above him, Sunny saw the world turn white from a flash of lightning. And in that white light, he finally laid his eyes on Maddox.